Are you ready to stop riding the emotional elevator of life? Are you ready to learn how to elevate your emotions that keep you psychologically traumatized or in an addictive behavior? You are in the right place. Here is your host, Sandee Byrd, trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach of the Emotional Elevator Show.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Tonight's show is all about imposter syndrome. So, why do you want to listen? What do I know about imposter syndrome? And, oh, yeah, my name is Sandee Byrd. You're listening to me on Inspired Choices Network, and this show is called Emotional Elevator. And tonight's topic is imposter syndrome. I'm not a psychiatrist. I did study psychiatry, so what makes me an expert on imposter syndrome? Because I have imposter syndrome. That's what makes me an expert. I'm not really an expert. I don't have a degree in it, but I do know a lot about it. So all those little taglines or however you want to say it, that is part of imposter syndrome. And how did imposter syndrome really start? See, it's evolved. It's like everything in life. We come up with this little word or this little catchphrase, and then it just evolves to almost include everybody. But in life, sometimes we take on identities and we have explanations. This is not a psychological disorder. It's not. It's just a label to help us understand when we talk a certain way to ourselves or feel a certain way within ourselves. But in 1978, and I'm looking down for a minute because I want to make sure I get their names right, Dr. Clancy and Dr. Ines, or Emus, I think someone said recently, coined the term. And why it was coined was, so the reason I know somewhat about the background behind it is because the Dr. Clancy is from Appalachian area, Virginia. I live in Richmond, Virginia. Basically, if you don't know that demographics, it's basically the foothills. It's basically, a lot of people, joke that they're the hill people and what do they know? And yeah, they're not mainstream educated. But this is a doctor who received many doctorants who researched this and realized and coined it mainly around women who are highly educated but feel like they're imposters, feel like because of their upbringing or where they come from does not give them the velocity to be educators. So what this basically means is like they feel fraud, they get anxious that they're going to be figured out as to something they are not, but they are. So it's basically when I started, even my podcast, just going to want to listen to my podcast, having that conversation with myself and what makes me an expert on these topics. Because I talk on topics that I feel like, am I an expert? Pretty much, yes. Why do I feel I'm an expert? Because I experience it. I feel it. Here, I got my wand going. I feel it. I've done it. I've said it. And that's why I feel I am an expert. And I believe that I am an expert because I still kind of go through that. Like today, sitting down going, okay, what key points can I talk about with this? And oh my gosh, what if they figure out like maybe I say something wrong? That is imposter syndrome. It's basically getting anxious and feeling like I'm a fraud by talking about it because I did not coin imposter syndrome, but I can relate because I deal with imposter syndrome. And when this started, it was in 1978. I'm going to put down my magic wand because I'm feeling pretty magically delicious right now because it was a term coined back in 1978 by these two female doctors who did not feel because of their background, their family background, where they came from, they did not have the standing, the solid ground to be taken seriously. They felt like they would figure out their fraud, even though they were highly educated women. highly educated women, but they felt that they got anxious because of their upbringing or where they came from. And that's why now imposter syndrome's everywhere. If you work with any type of coaches in life, usually imposter syndrome comes up. And because we broadened it so much from when it started. So that's what tonight's show was about. And then the second half is going to be about elevating yourself and how to get that imposter syndrome kind of elevated. Because I think we all at one point in our life, and come over here to Inspired Choices Network and get in this chat room. And I would love, or reach out to me at Sandee@emotionalelevator.com, or at my regular coaching email, which is Sandee Byrd, BYRD, coach@gmail.com. And let's have a discussion about this, because a lot of people don't realize that those feelings or the way we talk to ourselves is imposter syndrome, especially when it relates to education or a job or just our natural being out here in the world. So, like I said, this was coined back in 1978 by two female doctors. But then they started even evolving it into men as well, who were in these big roles or who got these big promotions in these jobs, and they didn't feel, because maybe they came from low income or maybe they came from that, so they felt these imposter syndromes. So that's where the term started broadening itself, because it had to do with what your family backgrounds. And some of that can also come with how you were even treated, because this has even gone more into science. And trust me, I have dove into imposter syndrome for a while now, and I completely understand imposter syndrome at this point, and I still have moments where I deal with imposter syndrome, but recognizing that's the biggest thing. And that's what I like to say here on Emotional Elevator. Didn't get you to land here today. I just kind of started in because I wanted you to kind of feel the anxiousness and, oh my gosh, is people going to come listen to this? And I'm not really an expert on this, and why would they want to listen to me? No, because I'm telling you, I am an expert on it because I've lived it, I've embraced it, and I can recognize it. And that's what is the biggest, I want to say, coming out part whenever you're working on something. Every topic that I've had on my podcast on Emotional Elevator has been something that I've embraced as I continually work on myself. And this is a topic that back when I started my podcast, yeah, imposter syndrome definitely dropped in on me. Who's going to want to listen to me talk about addiction? Who's going to want to listen to me talk about codependency? Who's going to want to listen to me talk about cold mother syndrome? Who's going to want to listen to me talk about how I raise I don't even know what I was going to say, multicultural children? Who is going to want to listen to me? Because I don't have a PhD in it. I don't have my doctorate in it. I do. I don't have it on a piece of paper, but I do have it in here, and I'm pointing to my head, my subconscious and my conscious, because that's what makes us experts on these topics, is when we can see it, feel it, touch it, know it, and embrace it within ourselves. So I do embrace imposter syndrome within myself. I do embrace all the topics that I come in here and talk about, because every once in a while, when that little imposter goes, talks in my ear, I can say, you know what? You're wrong, because, or I'm not choosing, I am not going to choose what you're saying. I'm going to choose and believe that people are going to want to listen to me talk about imposter syndrome. And so where it stems with me was, I didn't come from a low income background. Yes, there was times in my life where we weren't, but I didn't. I did come from a single mother household. I did come from an alcoholic mother. So yes, when I talk about alcoholism and the effects it had on me and my family, I am an expert again, because I know firsthand. I don't know firsthand about everything. I know firsthand on shame and guilt from rape. I know firsthand on shame and guilt, just in general, from a raising by an alcoholic mother. But tonight's topic is all about this imposter syndrome and why I want to broaden it to many, many different aspects of people. So when they first coined it, like I said, it was coined because they came from the, one of the doctors came from the foothills of Virginia, up in the mountains, those mountain people. What do they know? I'm surprised they have bathrooms in their houses back then. That is the mentality that they're taking in when they're getting all these education. And then when they go to it, how are they going to take me serious? Because I don't have the life experience. But you do. Your knowledge supersedes anything. And you've got to, and a lot of people, when they get into that, back then, 1978, when this was coined, when they got into those big jobs, oh, they're going to think I'm a fraud. They're going to think I'm this, even though they had the backing because they had not been in that job. We all go to a new job and have that, oh gosh, are they going to like me? Are they going to fire me? Am I going to make a mistake? We do that anyway. That's part of life. That's part of who we are. And if anyone walks into a job and thinks they're a superstar, reach out to me because I'd love to hear how you engulf that into yourself. Because I think we all go into places sometimes. But what is also a big factor with imposter syndrome is being in a household, and this was kind of what I came from, is a household where you're doing a great job. That's great. You did so great on that. You got an A plus, but why didn't you do the extra credit? The real winners in life do the extra credit. So it's filling me up, but then bringing me back down. So then, wow, I got this PhD, but I've never coached anybody or I've never done this. So that's where imposter syndrome kind of came into play too, when they started looking a little bit more into the research of family backgrounds. And I have a feeling, because I keep moving forward and backward, that I'm probably blasting out at you. But that's what I'm saying. That's how it started. It started with women who felt that because they weren't brought up in a doctor's home or in a doctrine home, that they do not have the validity behind their education. Education is education. We all have a form of education. Doesn't make any of us better or less than anything like that. And that is the biggest thing that I'm going to talk about tonight, because being in all these different sectors of the world now and being in very multicultural societies now and embracing getting to know different people around me where I live, this is a big concern. And I see a lot of people that are dealing with the imposter syndromes in life. And it really strikes a chord with me, because I too have dealt with imposter syndrome. And like I said, it comes from that mother who, you did a great job. That was great. And then you had but you could have done, or no one's really cares that you are great in math, or whatever was said is where my imposter syndrome comes from. Is the whole fact of, yeah, I could go tomorrow and go back to school and end up with this PhD or a doctorate, but that's not what I want to do. But does that make me less than or more than? No, but in some people's lives, that's the way they feel, that they have to have that complete backing. And then when they go for the job or end up working in that field, well, I'm talking a lot with my hands, they end up working in that field, they still feel like they're a fraud. They still get anxious every day if they make a mistake, that, oh my gosh, I could get fired. People might not take me serious. So that's what imposter syndrome is all about. It's our self-talk that we talk to ourselves. We call it a lot negative self-talk, But a lot of it, when it comes to what we do in life and how we interact with people, a lot of that is the imposter syndrome, that they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to take me serious. Even when we have conversations in groups, well, I better not say that because then they're going to figure me out. Or I better watch how I speak because then they're not going to see me as this spiritual leader or this coach. But anyway, I just dove into imposter syndrome. And we're going to actually go on our first break. I can't believe we've already jumped into the show. I kind of jumped in full force on this show. But you, of course, are listening to Sandee Byrd on Emotional Elevator here on Inspired Choices Network. And tonight, I am an expert on imposter syndrome, and I am going to talk about it. And then we are going to get into how do we reverse, how do we recognize, and how do we elevate ourselves. So let's go to our first break.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to sandy@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. As I was talking, and I kind of got that anxious, so I spoke very fast. So now it's time for me to slow it down. I wanted to kind of fill you in on imposter syndrome and what it feels like to be in an imposter syndrome body. So I kind of started out the show kind of very anxious, and who's going to listen to me talk about imposter syndrome? And how am I an expert on imposter syndrome? Because I have dealt with imposter syndrome. I still have moments of imposter syndrome. And like I said, in 1978, it was coined by two female doctors who, because of where they came from, never thought anyone would take them seriously. So they got anxious and felt like they were a fraud as psychologists. So that's where imposter syndrome came from. And it started getting more evolved as life went on. And now I'm going to slow myself down. And it got more involved as they realized some men also had it who came from certain areas and then ended up with these doctrines and PhDs, and they felt too the anxious, the anxiety, and feeling that they were a fraud because they were not brought up in these successful doctrine households or whatever. Well, it even comes more into play, and as I said, where I felt it, like putting on this podcast and talking about subjects of dependency, codependency, addiction, whole mother syndrome, raising multicultural children, almost every topic I've spoke about, I can honestly say I am an expert. I have studied. I can sit here and tell you all the things I've studied. I was in college for about 6 years without a completed degree because I did not know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a forever student that just studied. I first started studying law, so I know a lot of law, and realized I don't like history. Don't like history. Then I went in more into psychology, and then I learned as I got, I think, a couple of credits away from a psychology major that really have to continue school. So why don't I just continue school? So I went on to social work, and I wanted to basically work with children who needed someone to fight for them. I had already been a court-appointed advocate for children who had been in abuse. I had already done some great work in society at some of the homes around here with my being in social work. So I'd done many years of internship. So do I feel like, yeah, I know a lot. Plus, I lived a life, I've walked a life, I've talked a life, I know the life. So therefore, yes, I do suffer from imposter syndrome. I now embrace it because I recognize it and I know how to talk positively to myself. But imposter syndrome also started becoming coined more and became more spoken of, I guess, when minorities in minority families. No one's ever going to take you seriously because you're a minority, an indigenous or a brown person, or someone who did not come to this country, who came to this country in English and is not a true false American, that they need to get further education to be considered for these jobs. And I have definitely heard it. The person I had on last week, Vincent Ellis White, who does difficult conversations, and being part of that group, sitting there around people who can point to me and tell me that it doesn't matter how many degrees I get, I'm never going to be as successful as you. That is imposter syndrome, because they have been brought up to know or to believe, it's all a belief, we can change all of our beliefs, that you need to get the highest form of education in order to be taken seriously. That right there is imposter syndrome, because then they go in and they still don't believe because of what they have been told their whole entire life. They don't believe that they're good enough, that they're worthy enough. So they go into these jobs, and I was on I wasn't on this panel, but I was in the audience for a panel, and she said, I have to have a doctorate to even come close to you. And that really resonated with me, because I go home and I suffer when I first started coaching that, wow, how is anyone really, I have coaching degree, I've done coaching hours, I've got all this, but no one's going to take me serious. Why are they going to take me serious? What do I bring to the table? I'm a certified coach. I'm ordained. I could be a minister, but I don't walk the walk. I don't recite the Bible every day. How? It's it's the false beliefs within myself. But I am a coach, and I'm going to say it out loud. I'm a damn good coach, because I have studied so much of this. And that's even where imposter syndrome came in when I first got my degrees and started, oh, I want to learn this technique. I learned breathwork. I lifted. I learned hypnosis. I learned this. It was because my imposter syndrome was like, you're still not good enough. You're still not good enough. They'll know you're a fraud. They'll know this. So I continued to start getting education. And then I started coaching. And I am a good coach. And why is that? Because if I don't know, I'm not the one that's supposed to give you the answers. As a coach, I'm the one that's supposed to guide you towards your own solution to your question. That's what a coach does. So, yes, I am an expert at that because I don't have all the answers, nor am I going to possibly have the right answer for you. Because as a coach, my job is supposed to guide you on your own path, as I'm showing a path to get to the answer that you're looking for, because I'm not inside of you. But with imposter syndrome, sorry, sometimes we suffer from thinking we're not good enough, or they're going to figure out, I don't know the answer. Well, I'm not supposed to know the answer. You're supposed to come up with the answer. But it's that also with people who got these higher educations, and you see that they get these huge jobs and then they walk away and they go, oh, I need to get more education. Sometimes it's not because they want to get more education, because they truly don't believe in themselves because of what has already been ingrained in them. So what they're suffering from is imposter syndrome. And how many people who are listening to this, please, if you want, reach out to me at Sandee@emotionalelevator.com or at my personal coaching email, Sandee with 2 E's, Byrd, B-Y-R-D, coach@gmail.com. Because imposter syndrome is real. And when they coined this, they only thought it was for women who had these big degrees. No, I don't know anyone in their life who has not suffered from imposter syndrome. Think about imposter syndrome when you're in elementary school and the teacher calls on you. I can't tell her the answer. I don't know the answer. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm in school. Oh my gosh. That also is imposter syndrome, that you don't think you're good enough to answer the questions. So we start the imposter syndrome at such a young age. The problem, and I am going to say problem, is we don't learn how to change that thought in our brain. So now every single time we get called on, if we told the wrong answer once or we didn't believe within ourselves, it's just recycling. We're recycling it within ourselves. So then we go to school and we get these great educations and we go out in the world and we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough for this job. Oh my gosh, what did they figure out? We feel like we're frauds within ourselves. Frauds within ourselves. That is the main part of imposter syndrome, is we all feel like we are frauds. And how many people out there feel this way? How many times have you felt in your life? And when this started, it started when it came to jobs. But just think of life in general. How many times do you talk to yourself that I'm not good enough in a job? Or you even go to school, to college, to grad school, to get your master's, or you go for a doctorate or a PhD, and you still don't believe within yourself. And this is something you're researching. Like, I've researched as soon as when I worked with my first coach back in years now, we'll just say that. And she said, have you ever heard of imposter syndrome? We all went to a retreat and we talked about it. And I didn't believe it. And then I got home and let me research this. Let me research this. I'm a researcher. I am a researcher. You give me a topic, I'm going to research it until I understand it. And then I'm like, I have imposter syndrome. How can I change this for myself? Then I already started coaching. And I was like, how am I gonna help other people? Imposter syndrome. Help them. So then I'm realizing I am now fully engaged in imposter syndrome, because not only am I researching it to fix it, to come up with the answer within myself, now I'm helping other people and thinking I'm a fraud, because how am I going to help them when I can't even help myself, and da 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 da. And then that whole thing, the smoke's coming out of my brain and I am like in overload. And that's what imposter syndrome is. But there's so many ways to deal with it and change and evolve and elevate yourself through it. And oh my gosh, it is what am I saying? It is time for another break. And you are listening to me on Inspired Choices Network, where I am an expert on elevating our emotions. I am Sandee Byrd. And please come over here if you're listening to me on any other platform on Wednesday nights when I am live, to come in the chat room. Or like I've said, reach out to me at my email at sandy@emotionalelevator.com. But if it's something that's really pressing you, your best bet is to email me at my coaching email, because that is the one that I look up pretty frequently, at Sandee with 2 E's, Byrd, B-Y-R-D, coach @gmail.com. So we're going to go to another break.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sandee@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. I've been talking about imposter syndrome and how detrimental it can be to us, and how it makes us believe things about ourselves that aren't true. And I was talking a lot about my imposter syndrome, and when I became a coach and I realized through my own coach that I was dealing with imposter syndrome, which made it even worse. I even felt more like a fraud, and it gave me more anxiety to think about, how am I going to coach other people when I'm still dealing with my stuff, and da 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 da. And let's just go into a big topic on it, and then we're going to talk about elevating our emotions. Think about your favorite actor. Think about your favorite singer or band, or even your favorite sports person. Think about them. How many times, think about, I'll think about Troy Aikman. I was a huge Dallas fan, and Emmitt Smith. And think about all the times that they went on there and maybe missed a pass or threw to the wrong person, whatever, fumbled, however. Think about how they talk to themselves, and how many times maybe they ran out on a field and thought to themselves, I'm not good enough to be here. How am I here? What have I done to get here? It's not an educational background that they're out there for. It's a sport or a singer or an actor. It's that negative self-talk, and we all do it. think about some of these incredible designers. Sometimes you look at some of these runway shows and you're like, what were they thinking? But then people are buying it for the name. So I think when imposter syndrome started, it just was two women that didn't feel the velocity behind their doctrines and their doctor. But just think how much involved it's become and how many it affects when it comes to people of minority too, where they have to feel like they have to continue education to even feel valued enough. So when you come down to it, we all suffer from some form of imposter syndrome. It doesn't necessarily have to be from receiving a high education and you go into that job. It can be almost anyone in anything can be part of imposter syndrome. But now, how do we elevate? How do we, elevate ourselves on the imposter syndrome? First, you got to recognize it. First, you've got to realize when you're talking to yourself in some ways to embrace that. Why am I saying this about myself? Why? Why am I believing that? How am I believing that? What part of me is making me believe that I'm a fraud? What's giving me this anxiety? Because newness in anything, the newness of me just becoming a coach was anxious. How am I going to be true to myself? How am I going to put myself out there? How are people going to get to me? How do I sell myself? I mean, that's things I've never had to worry about. Oh, I've sold with some big companies, not literally sold with some big companies, but when I was with some big companies and I was out there, I was able to sell that. So how come I couldn't sell myself? So it's basically, and my coach calls it an evidence list, and I now, do it with all my clients. Write down a list. And I don't necessarily call it an evidence list. I say write down your strides list and write down your accomplishment list. Call it many different things as to who I'm working with. And write down what it is and this is something to elevate yourself when it comes to imposter syndrome. When it comes to, oh wow, I'm not good enough. My podcast, who's going to want to listen to my podcast? Well, write down the people that listen to you. Well, my client, this client, and now they reach out to me and tell me, I just sent that, the cold mother syndrome. I sent it to my mom. I listened to it. That was great. Or one of my clients right now was talking to me about one of them. That's evidence that I have value to give. So it's writing down lists for yourself, whatever you want to call it, your A++ list or your extra credit list or whatever you want to call it, to whenever you talk to yourself that way, write down a list. Because if you saw the journals and the list and some of the stickies I've put on showers to my mirrors, it's also I can talk confidently with myself. So when that imposter, because that's why it came from, that imposter within us that convinces us that we're not good enough or that we're frauds or that this isn't for us, you've got to change that dialogue and you've got to convince your imposter that that's not who you are. And some of it comes from years of our upbringing to that's the wrong answer when you're in first grade. That's the right answer, Sandee. You need to study more. To realizing that now, wow, how am I going to coach somebody? I don't get the answers right. I'm not supposed to give them the answers. And that's where my self-talk started coming in to positivity. And I started realizing that I could let go of that imposter, because as a coach, I'm supposed to guide you. And as I'm showing with my hands, I'm supposed to guide you to come to your own solutions, to come to your own answers. I'm not supposed to give you the answer, because the answer for me might not be the same answer for you. but we are going to work together as a team because a coach is part of a team and guides the team and leads the team to the outcome. But is the coach running down the field, scoring the touchdown? No, the coach is actually the one telling them, okay, we'll go left, go right, but if right's open, go right. It's basically giving you the knowledge within yourself to continue to run to the base, to the goal. I don't know, whatever, however you want to see that. But that's what imposter syndrome is. It's giving yourself the answers or coming up with different ways to talk to yourself. So when you do go get that education and you go to this job or you go out with this person or whatever it is, and you're not good enough to be with them. What makes you think you're good enough? You're good looking enough to be with that person. Go in the bathroom and say, look at me, I am good looking. My purple hair that I just got done is gorgeous. Talk to yourself in that positive way. And one of the biggest, and this is a couple of weeks away, one of my podcasts coming up is talking in the mirror to ourselves. Mirror, mirror on the wall. But that's a couple of weeks away. But having that conversation with ourselves, standing in front of the mirror and talking to ourselves. When we have that, if you're in the middle of a big presentation or something and something's telling you some negative thought, go, I've presented before to 5 people, this is 10. Or if it's 5 people and it was 10, I presented to 10 people before and I rocked it. Keep talking to yourself to elevate yourself, because the only way to get through imposter syndrome is recognize that you're having that imposter syndrome, that talk to yourself that's not who you are now. That's who you might have been, but that's not who you are. Every day, redefine who you are. Every day, redefine who you are. Talk to yourself. I can't tell you, some mornings I have a very long ritual. Some mornings I have a very short ritual. Nothing is perfect when it comes to that. Some mornings I can do a 15-minute ritual and I'm good. Some mornings I have to do a half an hour to an hour ritual, and I allot myself that time. But I talk to myself. If I'm starting with a new client and the imposter comes in and goes, well, don't make the same mistakes you made with such and such. I go in and I tell myself, that was never a mistake. That was a lesson that I needed to learn within myself. And what is it that I learned? It's all about taking that imposter, because that's all it is. It's an imposter. What is an imposter? It's not you. And talking to it and embracing it and say, thank you for visiting me and thank you for telling me that, but I don't believe that. And talk positively to yourself in a mirror or write yourself a note. Have you ever been somewhere and you're thinking about something and you're like, oh, I really need to write that down. And then you go write it down. It's the same thing when that imposter comes to invade you. Thank you for visiting me, but I no longer need your service. I am choosing to let go that I'm a fraud. I'm choosing to let go that I'm undeserving. I'm choosing to let go that this might be my first experience, but I need to experience it to learn. Because that's, like I talk about doing a podcast again. I had another podcast, not gonna, I'll name it, but I had one before. So when I started a second one, I was more confident within myself, but I still had that imposter come through and say, who's going to want to listen to you? You know what? I had followers at the last one, and I've got people already asking for my podcast. I had people already saying, the day after, I listened to your podcast last night. But some people with their own imposters, and I'm saying this out there because I'm challenging people out there, your own imposter doesn't want you in the chat room because you don't want to be a part of this, because then you might be seen as admitting. Nobody sees these chat rooms but us. So it's that. And it's the same thing as when we go out and we stalk other people's posts because we're like, wow, that was really profound. But don't let me like it. Don't let me respond on it. Because that imposter says, then they might think you're crazy like they are, or they might think you're thinking the same as them, or they might think you believe that, or they might think you think that or that. What does it matter? Be yourself. Be who you are meant to be, and challenge that imposter in you to say, you know what? I can comment on that. I can like that because I'm who I am and I love myself. It's funny because a lot of people will say some type of sarcasm and say something sarcastic to me. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay because I still like myself. And they're like, yeah. And I said, and every morning I get up and I look in the mirror and I say, I love you. And I'm so proud to be you, because that's what I say to myself. And you know what? I don't care how silly that sounds. That elevates me every day. And the days I don't do it, the imposter's quick to come in and go, yep, I got you right now. Trying to think of the commercial, what commercial it is with the sick little green guy who comes in, whatever that is. But think about that. He can't get through because of the medicine. Think about you. The imposter can't get through if you are not letting it, if you are talking positively to yourself, if you are convincing yourself, if you are feeling within yourself that you are not the imposter, that you are the real person. So that's what elevating yourself is all about in this imposter syndrome. But it is time for our last break. I can't believe I thought I was going to run out of time talking about imposter syndrome, and I feel like I'm going to run out of time and not talk about everything about imposter syndrome. But we are going on our last break. And when we come back, I'm just going to continue talking about how to elevate yourself and talk to yourself to get rid of that imposter, because you are not the imposter. An imposter is not you. It's someone claiming to be you. So they're not you. They're not a part of you. They're just visiting you. So we're going on our last break. Thank you for joining me.
Are you living a life of psychological trauma or suffering from an addiction? Are you ready to learn new techniques to elevate your emotions without sustaining or obtaining them from substances that are not good for your mind or body? Then continue to tune into Emotional Elevator with trauma, addiction, life, and spiritual coach, Sandee Byrd, where you will learn techniques to elevate your emotions that don't require a magic pill, food, or impulsive behavior. Listen to Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific, on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is Emotional Elevator with Sandee Byrd. To participate in this program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to sandy@emotionalelevator.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back. You have been joining me tonight. I don't think I've said this enough. You have been joining me tonight on Emotional Elevator, and I am your host and expert of all the topics I talk about on Emotional Elevator. And you are joining me on Inspired Choices Network, who fully believes in this network, and they are inspiring choices. So I am Sandee Byrd, and I have been talking tonight about imposter syndrome and how imposter syndrome started and how it evolved and how you can elevate yourself and how to talk to yourself to let go of that imposter. Because what an imposter is, someone that thinks they are you, but they're really not. It's someone who is imposing in you, but it's not you. So let that imposter go. You don't need that imposter. That imposter is not serving you. So just continue to talk positively. And like I said, when get up in the morning, look in the mirror. If there's something where you're somewhere and you're getting that fraudulent feeling and you're anxious, find a mirror and say, I'm choosing to let you go because I deserve to be here and I deserve to be where I am. Or if you're in the middle of a meeting and presenting, like I public speak now, and yes, the imposter syndrome. And my first thing is I have a podcast and I have had this many people listening to me. So this room of 20 people, they are absolutely going to listen to me and they're going to enjoy every moment of this conversation. So I let go of that imposter because that imposter does not belong to me. So it's almost the end of this show, but next week's show are the 3 A's, and it's not addiction. It's acceptance, approval, and avoidance, and how they tie together. And what do we accept? What do we see as accept? What do we see as approval? And what do we avoid? How many times do we really want acceptance from others? And when are we just going to accept ourselves? And how many times are we looking for approval from others? Why don't we just approve of ourselves? And what do we avoid because of that acceptance or non-approval? And what don't we need to avoid? So that's next week's show. But tonight I've been talking all about imposter syndrome, and I've dove in about me having imposter syndrome, and that makes me an expert. And I've studied imposter syndrome, which is not a big deal, but I have lived it, I felt it, I've embraced it, so I know about it. And that's what makes me know that I'm an expert on imposter syndrome, because I can speak on it, because I've lived it. And like I said, I've felt it. And the things I do to change it. And if ever anything on this show, you want to reach out to me at Sandee@emotionalelevator.com. But like I said, one of the best emails is Sandee with two E's, Byrd, BYRD, coach@gmail.com. Because I'm always looking at that email from clients and customers and people I have contracts with, because I want to help people who want to help themselves. And who better to help somebody than to someone who's had to go through a lot of help themselves through therapy and coaching and just looking in the mirror and talking to myself in that positive tone and elevating myself, because Emotional Elevator came from me learning how to elevate myself and let that imposter out of my body and let go of the imposter. I am no longer who I believe I was. And like I said, I am no longer who I believe I was. So again, thank you tonight for joining me on Emotional Elevator and talking about imposter syndrome. And what is it that you think about yourself where you're a fraud or that gives you anxiety? And how can you elevate yourself to let go of the imposter? Pick that imposter up out of your head and let it go. Fling it across at the wall like spaghetti and let it stick at the wall. Because you no longer need to believe what you thought was you when it really isn't you. So again, I am Sandee Byrd on Emotional Elevator on Inspired Choices Network. And I'm always willing to have a conversation with somebody about any of the topics I've had on my show, because I am an expert in those topics, because they have been everything that I have worked on and dealt with within myself. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Emotional Elevator Show. Sandee returns Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, start elevating your emotions and stop riding the emotional elevator that is stopping you from living the life you deserve.